Well, thank you all for inviting me here. I want to give a brief introduction of who I am. My name is Carl Jones. I am the director of the Citrus County Building Division. I was born and raised in Brevard County. I was born in Titusville, and most of my career is working in Brevard County, but most recently I relocated here from Palm Beach County. I was the building official in a little town called Belle Glade. Have any of y'all ever heard of Belle Glade? Any of y'all got any interest in going there? No. I didn't like Belle Glade, just the location. The job was a great job. I didn't enjoy living there, and my wife and I were looking for jobs elsewhere, and we came across this job in Citrus County. And I'll never forget, my wife and I got on the internet and we looked up the map of Citrus County, and we looked at it and we thought, oh my gosh, this is a county that is so surrounded by water on all sides. The Withlacoochee River runs up the east side and the north side, and then there's the Salapopka Lake chain all through that area. On the west is the Gulf of Mexico, obviously, and rivers, from the springs going out to the Gulf. This was a water community, and that's what I grew up with. And I told my wife, I said, man, it would be so great if I could get a job in Citrus County and run their building department. And that was so exciting. And I remember on the interview, when I came here for the interview for the job, I was interviewed by Vince Catero and about 5 other people from the county. And one of the first things that Vince said was, you understand that if you're the acting building official, you're also going to be the floodplain manager for the county. Well, that came as a complete surprise. Not that I have a problem with it. I am a certified floodplain manager, but I knew that in a county surrounded with this much water, there are floodplains everywhere. I think 40% of the landmass is covered by, it's not landmass, but 40% of the area is covered by water. This is the wettest county I've ever seen, ever. And it is a challenge. Floodplain management is a challenge. You could safely say that 90% of Crystal River, all of Homosassa, much of the Sugar Mill area is all in a floodplain. And some people get confused by what that means. And realistically, if you were to look at the technical term floodplain, every place is a floodplain. It's just that some areas are a very low risk floodplain, and we would call that a zone X. Are you all familiar with the different zone designations on a map? On the old maps, they used to call areas that had very low risk of flooding, it was either C, B, or X. Okay, C, B, or X.
And those are your preferred flood zones in insurance?
Yeah, they carry a very low risk of flooding. Then there's an area that's called the shaded X, which is an area that has a 1 chance in 500 years, okay, of flooding. They call it the 500-year floodplain. Now that's what, 0.02% chance of flooding in any given year. But they still call it a flood zone. It's a shaded X area. And then there's what we call the area of special flood hazard, okay? The special flood hazard area is that area that has a 1% chance of flooding in any given year. A layman would call it the 100-year flood, okay? It's the chance of a storm coming through once every 100 years, and the water rises to a certain level associated with that storm, that 1% chance storm of happening. Now around here, I've been told that in 2004, a storm came through called the No Name Storm. 93.
That's correct.
93.
Yeah, 2004.
2004 was the hurricane.
Consecutive storms.
1993, the No Name Storm came through and left water standing in the Crystal River City Hall 3 feet high up on the walls. Is that fairly accurate? That people were parking their cars on the Publix parking lot at Highway 19 and boating back to their homes in Homosassa.
19 was a lake.
Yeah, it was.
A lake.
All the way up to the armory.
Yeah, that was probably not a 100-year storm. It wasn't even declared. It wasn't even a declared or named tropical depression or storm. It was just, that's why it got called the No Name Storm. Yet water was standing 3 feet deep in City Hall at Crystal River. Floodplain management in its simplest form, is ensuring that things that are built or constructed in a special flood hazard area are done so that it minimizes flood damage or flood risk. That's what floodplain management is. It kind of goes hand in hand with, building department functions, and I think that's why oftentimes you'll see a building official is the certified floodplain manager. Every time we get a permit application in, the first step of the process is that we open up the maps, we locate the property to see whether or not it's in a special flood hazard area. The second step of the process is to determine how deep do we expect the water to get at that location if that 1% storm came along. And we call that elevation, how deep we think the water is going to get, is called the base flood elevation. Now the base flood elevation is kind of a swag, okay? It's a sophisticated wild-ass guess based on history.
It's very true.
It is. A lot of people would like to think that it's, see,
I'm gonna charge you $10 for that.
This is expensive. The base flood elevation is a guess. And here's how it works. Somebody comes along and they sort of estimate how much rain would be expected to fall out of a storm that has a 1% chance of happening. Another thing that how they determine base flood is not only how much water will fall, but what kind of ground is it falling onto. If it's falling onto clay ground, a soil that has lots of clay in it, it's not going to permeate into the soil. It tends to collect on the surface. And then there's also something called contours. If you have a large area of ground that all contours down into a low spot, and it's not very permeable soil, the rainwater is going to fall, collect on top of the ground, run downhill, and fill up that hole. A lot of people don't get the fact, or they don't take this into their mind, that you can have elevations above sea level of 100 feet above sea level and still be in a flood zone, and you can flood. Because of this, soil versus rainfall versus contour situation can create flooding in all kinds of places. You don't have to be on low ground, relatively speaking, low ground to flood. We have floodplains where the base flood elevation is 60 feet above sea level. 100 feet above sea level is not unheard of. You could, as a realtor, or any other professional for that matter, could look at a neighborhood and say, I know that neighborhood. That's 100 feet above sea level. Like Kensington, for example. Are you familiar with Kensington? I just bought a house in Kensington. I'm an official permanent resident of Citrus County, but I looked at the subdivision of Kensington. All those elevations are 100 feet plus. I think the lowest part of Kensington might be slightly under 100 feet. Believe it or not, there are little tiny spots of flood zone in Kensington. There are special flood hazard areas in there, and it's all due to soil factors, contours, and the amount of rain that could fall in that area. The building code has recently adopted provisions in it that now say you don't, the building code says you must comply with the FEMA regulations for a flood zone. Believe it or not, it used to be the case where the building code was a standalone code and it didn't address floodplain management. And then the floodplain management regulations were enforced by a separate entity based on whether or not they wanted to participate in the NFIP program, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. There are some communities that don't participate in the program.
Very few.
There are some.
There are some, oh, that's correct.
We have 2 of those communities that are in this county. Inverness and Crystal River do not participate in the NFIP program. So theoretically, if they wanted to, at some time, they could have said, you're in a floodplain, but just go ahead and build your house, or go ahead and build your commercial building. And there weren't any regulations directly tied to development or construction. If you go through Homosassa area and some parts of Crystal River, you will find many, many structures that were built in a floodplain, but they're below that base flood elevation. Okay? They did not comply with the applicable regulations that would have applied for a community that did participate in the program. And I'm bringing that up because she, I'm sure, is going to address this in her insurance presentation, because the finished floor elevation of your home in relationship to that base flood elevation is absolutely critical in establishing how much your premiums are for flood insurance.
That's correct. A lot of times, excuse me, Carl, I'll just
That's okay.
interject. Well, my name is Melissa Seney from Insurance Resources in Beverly Hills, so if any of you have any further questions, or if I didn't give you a business card, just let me know. But in relation to that, one of the very first questions that is often posed to me when it's in a flood zone, well, what's the flood? I know the base flood. There are other factors that are involved in the flood total premium in order to derive that. The base flood obviously is the most, and then the lowest floor, and then the next highest floor. But each home is specific. There is no same home in that realm. So that's why if you often get an answer of, I just don't know, it's just because really we don't know. We can say $1 to 10,000, but you guys would get really upset with us if we said that. But it really is very specific, and an engineer has to go out and to identify that. And those specific are, obviously, Crystal River Homosassa, and I have an AO3 zone that I just did yesterday in Inverness. So,
There's a lot of them in Inverness.
There's a lot in Inverness. So, just because, and Carl had mentioned about the lay of the land, it's very true, and here's an example. Citrus Hills, when Citrus Hills was first building in Terra Vista, when I was at another agency, I had a really great couple. They built that home, and when Citrus Hills in construction did enough drainage in their area to let the water pass through when it rained, and they ended up with a flood. It wasn't like a flood, but it was enough for them to have water in their garage and in their house. I often say construction changes the lay of the land. It doesn't matter how high you are. Even if you're in a preferred zone, which they were, a flood can happen. And so it just, we're on a peninsula, it's Florida. We have water on all sides, and it's true. But the base flood elevation is something that sometimes is noted with the county, and then other times it's not noted with the county, because these older homes had never really needed to. They were grandfathered in. They didn't need elevation certificates. So a lot of what we're going to talk about here, I'm sure Carl will continue. We'll talk about the Big Waters Act, but that's all changing.
As she touched on a few things that are really important issues, and it kind of goes into the regulations associated with building in a flood zone. First of all, we need to determine what areas of the county are flood zones. The last time that Citrus County was analyzed to determine where the flood zone was in the 1980 timeframe. And there were maps that came out in 1984 as a result of what they call a flood study. Engineers come through the county, they analyze the soil conditions and the contours, and they come up with areas that they believe are prone to flooding within that 1%. And a map was produced. I will tell you that when the maps were produced and given to Citrus County in 1984, that's when the majority of the maps.
Oh, March 1981.
80.
Or FEMA 1984.
Yeah, the 84 is the date that the maps actually hit our desk, and once those maps landed in the county, that's when obviously the county had to start enforcing the regulations associated with the flood zone. The problem is that those contour lines were not very accurate. If I were to open up the map panel, or the portion of the map that covered Crystal River, what you would see is it's basically a white map, and then the flood zones are shown with a kind of a blotchy blue
line,
kind of a color. Yeah, there's a line and this big blotchy blue place. The thing is that line is not very accurate. It's definitely not straight. Flood doesn't follow streets or property lines or things like that. It goes where it wants to. So, but the thing is that map doesn't have streets on it. there are no reference points. There are a few streets on it, I should correct myself, but it's basically a blank piece of paper with a few streets on it, and then this big blotchy blue area. Well, as a floodplain manager, I would have to go to some other map and find your property on that map, and then measure how far your property was from some major road or prominent feature in the county, and then see if I can locate that same road or prominent feature, and then scale it on the flood map to determine if you were in and out of that area, in or out of that area. And the accuracy was probably, if I could get it within 300 to 500 feet, I would be thrilled, because of the inaccuracy of the maps. Those maps were really very difficult to work with. Those maps are still the ones that are currently in effect right now. It's just very hard to determine if a property truly is in or out of a flood zone, but we do the best we can. Recently, and I'm talking within the last 5 years, the FEMA has gotten together with the Southwest Florida Water Management District.
Swift funds.
Yeah, it's a neat kind of way to say it. And I came from the St. John's River Water Management District is where I was born and raised.
There's no fun things there.
No way to say that, Swift Mud. FEMA got together with Swift Mud, and they basically came to the conclusion that the current maps that we're using are inaccurate, hard to work with, and just aren't as good as they could be. They were based on slipshod data. So they said, we're gonna remap the entire county. The new maps, I just received a set of new maps, which is the preliminary maps. They're not adopted yet, but I've had a chance to look at them. The new maps were created with a system called LIDAR. And I don't know if I'm getting too detailed if you want to hear about this, but to me it's fascinating. What they did is they basically flew an airplane over the county, and they used a laser system where they shoot a laser beam down to the ground. When this laser beam hits the ground hundreds of times, it's a frequency. They shoot it at a certain frequency, but basically the laser beam hits the ground about every 4, 5, 6 feet in both directions. The laser beam sends a reflection back to the airplane, and the airplane calculates the elevation of the ground and creates a contour map. This map is accurate to within 6 inches, okay? Now what's happened is that Swift Mud took all this LIDAR data, which we're talking about millions and millions and millions of laser shots on the ground over the entire county, and they created a model of the county. Every little crook, crevice, ditch, swale, septic tank in somebody's yard showed up. I mean, these maps are ultra accurate. They combine that with soil data, what types of soils are in different areas, and then they come up with water accumulation. They sent me, and another thing that they've done is the old maps just have an occasional street where it's kind of an undefined area. The new maps, they've taken all that data and overlaid it on top of an aerial photograph. So now, if somebody says, I live at 318 East Lancaster Street, I can actually go to the aerial map. I will find 318 East Lancaster Street. I can see the house, I can see the driveway on the aerial, and I can see exactly where the floodplains are. It's so accurate that I've seen properties, I've been looking at these maps now for the last month and a half. It's so accurate that you can actually see a piece of property where the entire property is in a floodplain, but the builder built the house up on a mound system, and the septic tank is in a mound system, and there's a little tiny square cut out in the flood zone where the septic tank is and where the house is. So that that house, technically the building is not in a flood zone, where the property may be. If you were to look at the same aerial map that covers the Crystal River Airport, you would see that the entire airport is a flood zone, except the little runways and the little connecting taxiways that go between the runways are elevated just enough to take them out of the flood zone. That's how accurate they are. They are truly amazing. And I would invite any one of you to come down to the building department. We have a set of the maps there in the building department that you can come and look up your property, see your house, and see exactly where you fit within the floodplain. They're also available online. So these maps are proposed to be adopted September of 2014 is the proposed adoption date. I can't wait for it to happen because the maps are just so easy to use. They're definitive. There is no question about what areas are subject to flooding and which areas are not. There's no guesswork involved with it. They are just super nice and detailed. Now, the way that these maps affect construction and the regulations, and I'm going to keep this very basic, is if you build a building within a floodplain, you have to elevate the slab of that building above the base flood elevation, that elevation that they think it'll flood to. Citrus County has gone a little bit further in adopting what we call a 12-inch freeboard, meaning we don't want you just above the floodplain. We actually require 12 inches above that base flood elevation for your finished floor slab. That's where Melissa was alluding to the fact that finished floor elevation is critical to determining the risk or flood insurance risk associated with the property. If a person, and here's a typical example, it used to be that you could build right at the BFE. A person would build a house and they would put their finished floor elevation of the home at the BFE, but the garage might be 4 inches down or 3-4 inches down. It's below the base flood elevation. According to the regulations, you would have to put in what's called flood vents.
And if you don't have flood vents and that happens,
But what the flood vents do is FEMA recognizes that if a property floods, there are certain areas of a home or building that are not as critical as the living area. And those areas are access, storage, and parking. Areas used for parking, areas used for storage, or areas used for access to the home.
unfinished walls.
These areas have to be constructed of materials that are not prone to damage when they do get flooded. And the idea is that your house can be above the base flood elevation, your garage can be down low, and the theory is that the garage is not such an area of concern. They let the floodwaters come in, and they let the floodwaters go out. And when it's all over with, you sweep out the garage and everybody goes on with life.
As long as your machinery isn't in there.
That's a theory, okay? So,
No, in the bottom, because some people will still keep their handler or their, whatever still on that bottom floor, so.
yeah, one of the
We have to
requirements.
account in insurance for that machinery, so just wanna.
Now that is the very basics of theory behind construction in a flood zone. Everything that's susceptible to damage needs to be above that base flood elevation. One of the ways that we determine that, and the primary way that we determine compliance, whether somebody built it appropriately, is that we tell them, when you build a new building, you must hire a surveyor to go out and survey the new construction and fill out a FEMA form, which we call an elevation certificate. And that certificate will tell us the elevation of the finished floor, the next floor above the finished floor, its elevation, the adjacent grade, meaning the elevation of the ground around the building, lowest and highest adjacent grade, finished floor,
I call
next
those the
floor
legs
above,
and the eggs.
and the lowest floor. Now, the lowest floor is not always the finished floor of the living area. Remember, there could be that garage that's slightly lower. So it would give me the elevation of the living area and the elevation of the garage below that. That elevation certificate is primarily required by the building department so that we can ensure compliance. If you build a building and you don't provide me with that elevation certificate when you're in a flood zone, you're not getting a CO. Until I am absolutely positive that building complies with the code, you don't get a CO, you don't get the move-in, and so on. And every building, I want to say this, God, I hope it's true, because I get audited all the time.
I'm
But
waiting.
every
because
building,
I'm
every
not
new
gonna-
construction home, we require that elevation certificate, and my technician, we have a flood technician, she takes that elevation certificate, and she reviews it to make sure that all the elevations are correct, and then she files it away, and we keep it for the life of the building.
Is that Carla?
It is now. There's a new girl named Carla Greca is her name.
Yep, she's a very nice lady, and she's a very valuable asset to me, and I've met her since the day one, actually,
Yeah.
about her.
Now, that elevation certificate will not only ensure that that building is built in compliance with the building codes, but that elevation certificate is also the primary piece of paper that's used by a flood rater, do they call them rater, underwriter?
Well, they just.
Loans are underwriting, right?
Yeah, we're underwriting it.
What is it when you're in insurance? Is it underwriting?
Well, I'm an agent, and
Right.
the policy that I write is underwritten by FEMA.
Got it. Well, that policy premium cannot be determined without that elevation certificate. Until they know all of the risks associated with the flood zone, they're not gonna be able to attach the appropriate
That's
premium
correct.
to the policy.
And I'd like to just interject because, just one thing, for all my insurance, friends out there, insurance professionals. I often get, well, FEMA is a set rate, okay? It's a set, the federal, the Men in Black, they set the rates. So the rate should be the same with every insurance carrier you get a quote from. But here's the thing, that insurance professional may not know how to read it correctly, okay? So there may be why the rates are different. So just keep that in mind, but the Men in Black set those rates, and those rates are not deviated, and they are based on that piece of paper that's provided. So if you're getting different rates, it has to do with maybe the person inputting that information, and I'm guilty. I'll raise my hands, I've had where after submitting my elevation certificate, where I've had one where it had increased, and it was out in the V zone. So, just keep that in mind, if you ever wonder why, there's gotta be a reason there, okay?
You mentioned that the finished floor has to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation.
Yeah, that's called freeboard, and that is a new requirement that took effect middle of 2013.
Okay, that's in a detailed zone. What about an undetailed zone? What's the
what?
An undetailed zone?
A standard
Where
zone,
there's
a
no-
preferred
where
zone.
There's no base flood elevation established.
The flood zone requirements don't take effect on any properties unless they're in a special flood hazard area.
So
Okay, so that's the A zone, the B zone,
Yeah,
But if the A zone doesn't have a base flood elevation determined, if it's an
we
undetermined,
determine it.
they have to have it
The
determined.
building department,
you will determine it?
me as the floodplain manager, I'm authorized to make that determination of what the base flood is, if no other data is available. Now, the really cool thing is that the new maps that just came out, all the elevation data is available. That's what that LiDAR system did, is it established contours and elevations. It made my job so much easier. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
If you buy a house like now, you're gonna use the current rate maps that you have in place now, the old
That's
ones.
right.
A year
Yes.
from now, or less than a year from now, the new rate maps are gonna go into place. What's gonna happen to the flood zone that that house was in that you bought today? If it's not, wasn't a flood zone now, and then either it's not, or vice
In other words,
versa.
is there a grandfather?
I mean, how's a person to know?
There's
what-
going to be
you
a
really
1
need to know
year-
what it's gonna be when a new rate maps go in place.
Well, right now, just to kind of, I'll say two things. You'll get a tentative provisional rate. It's gonna be a higher rate for that first year. If you do not get an elevation certificate. So if your house was, say, in Meadowcrest, and I'm just using this as an example. I'm just using this as an example. I'm not specifically saying Meadowcrest is in there or not. I'm just using this as an example. Let's say Meadowcrest is not in a flood zone, which it's not right now. It's in a preferred zone. They get a better rate. But now it's in an A11 zone. At that point, if they had a mortgage, the mortgage company would then require them to purchase flood insurance. If that person was lucky enough to own their house outright, they have a choice. And if they want to choose at that point to obtain a flood policy, they would need to comply and obtain the elevation certificate, okay? But if there's a mortgage on that property, the mortgage will require them to update that. They will.
So what I'm hearing is that when somebody buys a house that's currently in a flood zone, they better check the new rate maps to find out what the situation's gonna be.
And that's where that
Where-
E&O,
where it's
that's
not
where that
in
E&O comes in, that that Herbert Land Insurance, I can't remember his name, forgive me, but that's where he was coming in. And I've heard that there are several realtors that are in Pinellas County that have had situations where they have sold a home within the last 6 months, and then they had the first rate, and now the rate's gone up to like 15,000-20,000, and they're suing the realtors.
And that's because of the new law, but not.
Yeah, because they didn't
we got
disclose
rate
it.
because We have two situations.
So I don't necessarily know how you as realtors, but myself personally, I tell everyone that they're in a flood zone, okay, because they are. It's whether you're at a preferred or a standard, so it's how you approach them. I would encourage them to not discuss it with you, because then that would take the liability off, but you would also need to let them know that you're in a coastal county. That's where, you know, you're,
And defer to professional.
yeah, exactly,
Because
yes.
you don't know what's gonna happen.
exactly.
I might go to Carl. If I'm understanding your first statement here, if we're building new construction in a flood zone,
Special flood hazard area.
okay,
It's a technicality.
It is,
are you recommending that 1,500 other guy, whoever it is, bring you the desired site plan elevation of that home prior to starting?
Yes, it's gonna be
it has
required.
to.
So I wanna get that out of the way.
Yeah, that's,
So the
that
way
is
you
gonna
made
be,
it sound like at the end, you wouldn't get a CO. And nobody's gonna be in the right mind, start out with the base
okay,
elevation below it.
that's a really neat question.
Okay?
When somebody applies for a permit to build anything, a flood review
Yes.
is done in advance. We don't take anybody by surprise at the end of construction and say, oh, by the way, the building you just built is in a flood zone and you don't comply. No, we do a plan review up front. Everything is known up front before you ever break ground, before we actually hand you a permit. But the issues that we have in the building department are that some people just don't like to follow through with their paperwork. And, you know, they forget until the last minute and they forgot to call the surveyor, but the surveyor can't come out for 2 weeks because he's booked up. And I'm gonna tell them, I'm sorry, but until your surveyor gets there and produces the form,
All right, part B of that question then too is, for Melissa, then, once I've received this, can I come over to your office and get a quote using the new adopted version that won't be ready until September?
If you have the elevation certificate for that new structure, I will be able to give you the current rates at this very moment.
Why are we waiting till September?
Because, well,
I can explain that. That is a
Yeah.
very good question.
that's part 4 of the, you know, the
The,
big waters.
Then I'll just-
when FEMA got together with,
That's part, there's certain parts that timelines that they put in place.
FEMA got together with Swift Mud and decided that the maps were inaccurate. They went through a 2-year study to accumulate data to recreate the new maps. The new maps were created by an engineering firm called AECom. They were the ones who actually compiled the data and created the new maps. Like any other form of legislation or official document, there is an appeals process. Some people disagree with what SwiftMud has done, or they disagree with the determination that AECom came up with for their property, and there is an appeals period. We are right now in that appeals period.
How long is
Okay,
the
and it's
appeals
all-
period?
The appeals period is 90 days, and we're into it
We're almost at-
probably about halfway,
Yeah, I was just
45
gonna-
days
yeah.
into it.
Remember, it was recently, the county had an open meeting in Lecanto regarding, that was, when they were able to disclose the information. That was the first step. The second step is, waiting for this 90 days for you guys to come and say yay or nay, I don't like, or yeah, that's great, and then after the 90 days, they take that information and then they proceed to the next step.
Yeah, there are several stages that are involved in adopting a new map. One thing I will tell you is that there's a provision in the floodplain manager's manual and floodplain management regulations that I'm taking advantage of. And it kind of goes like this. As far as determining where a flood zone is, I'm constrained by law to use the old maps. You know, the big botchy blue area. I'm stuck with that because the new maps that are more accurate are not adopted yet. However, there's a little tiny loophole in the law that says regarding the establishment of the BFE, the base flood elevation, I'm allowed to use any currently available data that I believe is more accurate than available data. So I am using the new maps in floodplain management purposes, but I can only use them in establishing elevations. And I know that that's currently available data that's reliable. The LiDAR is awesomely accurate, and I am using it. Now, as far as the blue area, to determine whether you're in or out of a flood zone, I have to use the old maps. But once we determine which zone you're in, I am utilizing the elevation data, and in some cases, that's been very helpful to property owners, the new data.
Okay,
Is
is
it
there
safe
a,
to say then that the new maps, that all the building taking place now is based on the new maps?
No,
The
that
1
is not.
foot, you're not requiring the 1 foot.
There's the freeboard requirement is in place. Okay, that was a locally adopted ordinance.
This year.
Based on the new elevations that you're determining
No,
from the best.
freeboard,
That's two separate
Okay.
things you're talking about.
when development is proposed to take place, there are two determinations that we have to make. One is the property within the zone, with a special flood hazard area? That mandated that I use the old maps. The new ones aren't available till September of next year. The second part of that is, once we determine that it's in a special flood hazard area, we have to determine what the base flood elevation is for that area. That's where the little loophole allows me to use the new maps, because it's considered to be most recent, available, reliable, available data.
So you will use.
So I am using the new maps for elevation purposes.
And because you're using the new map for elevation purposes, a currently issued building permit
Yep,
will be built based on that determination you make.
on that elevation determination, yeah.
Okay, that's what I was talking.
Yeah. And the new maps, we've actually seen where it is going in favor of developers and builders, okay?
And I can
The
honestly
new
say
maps
that-
have not hurt anybody as far as.
But what about existing properties?
It has, because I had an instance where, it was in Inverness specifically. The house itself was not in the flood zone, but a portion of the backyard was. And they were able to call on Carl's office, spoke with Carla, and they were able to provide the information that was needed for her lender and me, so she didn't need to get flood insurance.
Based on the new maps?
one more point here. Another two-parter. Number one, will you be able to get a accurate footage that most everybody can go by and say 4.5 feet above the crown of an existing road? Or anything that's standard, or is it gotta be every particular
Yes.
property?
There is a standard.
Okay.
It's called the North American Vertical Datum, NAVD, and it's sea level.
Oh, I know that. That's on
Can
the
I
flood
give you
elevation
something in
certificate.
relationship to a landmark close to the property? No, I cannot. But all of these elevations are based on sea level NAVD, the North American Vertical Datum.
I didn't know what that meant. Oh, I do. It's on the elevation certificate too. Never knew what that meant.
I won't complicate this, but I've had several people that are weighing between mound building and stilt building.
Yeah,
And all of this is from this rhetoric from the last month of this Big at Waters Act that I've been reading from here to Tampa Bay every day. And I know you'll probably touch on that, so I'm not gonna steal your
Oh,
thunder.
we've been skating around that. You know,
bigger waters, I've got all the
we
information on.
do.
But
Okay.
while I'm at where they own blowout walls, blah, 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 a lot of people wanna mound it if it'll save them the premium, because then their elevation set for their base, the footer, obviously, will be on
Higher.
ground, not on stilts.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really wanna build on stilts and walk up and down stairs, or put in elevators, if I can build the property to a affordable premium for flood insurance on soil.
Okay, I'm gonna hear your
My
question,
understanding,
and I'm
up to
formulating the
now-
answer for you.
because I've built 2 houses on there, and both of them were in A11. My understanding from whenever, forever, was if you're in that V zone, you can't mount. It's still,
That's correct. If it's in the
Okay,
V.
that is something that we haven't talked about yet.
That's a
Is
scary.
that old school, or is
we
that?
don't have much.
Okay.
in this.
We've talked about a special flood hazard area. In general, most people would say, oh, that's an A zone. However, that is not the only special flood hazard area designation. There is something called the V zone. And what that is that as you get closer to the coastline, in Florida, we have a lot of that, coastline. There are areas that are not only subject to the accumulation of water, but they're subject to what's called storm surge. When a hurricane comes close to land, you get an increase in the water elevation, and the storm surge comes on shore, and it is always associated with wave action. So we have this flood zone, which is called the V zone, which is subject to storm surge and wave heights between 1.5 and 3 feet or greater. Okay, that's the key.
So all of them have to be in.
So now when you're close to the coast, you have this issue of not only do you have water that's rising that could inundate your home, but you also have destructive wave action that impacts the soils around the home as well as the home itself. Now, this gentleman's question was, how do we determine if it's beneficial to build on a mound or to use stilts? The building regulations say that if you're in an A zone, you can choose either way to satisfy that requirement in an A zone, because you're not subject to scour or wave action or losing soil and so forth. But if you were to build a mound out in the V zone, bring in fill dirt and build up the property and put a monolithic footer on top of it, and then wave action were to come along, the house may be a perfectly well-built house, but when the soil is gone from underneath it, it's going to collapse and have problems. So in a V zone, you have to not rely on fill dirt when constructing. You must build some sort of a pile support system that doesn't rely on the soil for support of the home.
So are foundation pilings required in a V zone now, or the engineering for foundation pilings?
The general answer for that is yes.
Okay, even in an A11?
A11 is the A zone.
Optional.
That is not the V zone.
Either
You're
or.
not- You're not subject to that.
I said either or, you can have the.
A zones are not subject to wave action and scour and having problems with the ground. Okay, that's kind of just the general thing. You're not subject to wave action. So in an A zone, you can pretty much pick how you'd like to comply with the requirements. In a V zone, you have to prove to me that the structure you build can withstand wave action and scour and movement of soil and that sort of thing. Okay, now that kind of goes back to your question, how do we make that determination? Well, the first thing is, where are you located, A or V? If you're in a V zone, you don't have a whole lot of options.
If you have a large enough parcel, you can change an A zone, a V zone to an A zone.
No, you cannot.
Yeah.
You cannot, because one of the requirements in a V zone, or one of the restrictions on a V zone, is that you can't bring in fill. And if you do bring in fill, there's the assumption that it won't stay there for long anyway. I mean, there are states that lose entire beaches due to storm surge and wave action. FEMA recognizes that you can fill all you want in a V zone, and the next good storm that comes along, you're gonna be right back to where you were before. That fill is gonna be gone. So they don't give you any credit for fill or use of fill on a piece of property.
On a V zone.
In a V zone, it will go away.
Like you, I'm from the east coast of Florida,
Me too.
and you have wave action.
Yeah.
And this particular parcel of land from about Homosassa to Cedar Key has a tremendous amount of marsh protection land, which will dissipate any wave action. And you can fight that it won't be under the standard wave action that you get on the coastal barrier of the east coast.
That's very technical.
You've done a little bit of your homework.
He's like, oh,
Citrus County is a very unique county.
Right.
We are a unique county in that there is a lot of marshland and mangrove and, is it sawgrass out there? What do they call it? Salt flats, what we call salt flats in Park County, but yeah, there is a lot of that, okay? But,
There's always that.
and I want you to get this mental image in your mind. When we were talking about A11, okay, as you go out Halls River Road, there's the first bridge you cross. Is that the
That's
Halls
Halls
River
River.
Bridge? or-
Yeah.
Okay, that bridge, I think the flood zone in that area is 11 or 12. Okay, that's kind of, one of the lines goes through that area. Okay, the base flood elevation is 11 or 12. The ground spot elevations from there all the way out to the coast are about 2 to 3. So what we're talking about is when a storm surge comes along, you would think that the marsh and the mangroves and all of that salt flat would break down the wave action. But try to remember that all of that marsh and salt flat is now 9 feet underwater.
Below sea.
Okay? Now, guess what happens when you're 9 feet underwater? It has zero effect on wave action. The waves actually do, I mean, it establishes itself as ocean bottom now. And it does not break down the waves like you think it would. Now, I just got a map it came from the National Weather Service, and what they did is they took a Category 1 storm, and they estimated how far the storm surge would go from a Category 1 storm in relationship to the Gulf, working inward. How far do you think that line goes?
To Meadowcrest. I don't know, I was just guessing. I was just like, what? I was like, whoa, tell me.
Another produced water up to,
10 miles.
up to Crystal.
The 19th.
From the mouth of the Gulf, are you talking about?
Yeah, how far inland from the Gulf do you think that Category 1 storm surge line goes? They call it the slosh map, by the way. That's what it's called.
10 miles.
And you can, well, it's
Well, 10
not a matter
miles.
of miles, it's all based on contour and what's out
Yeah,
there.
how the crow flies.
What I would tell you is that from the Gulf, up there by the barge canal, it comes in about half of the distance between the Gulf and 19,
I'll
okay?
say Crystal River High School in that.
Not quite. In the area of Crystal River, the city of Crystal River, there's that big bend in the road, it pretty much follows the bend of 19.
Isn't that interesting?
Okay? You go down south towards Homosassa where Halls River Road is, it's about a half mile past 19.
Yeah.
Okay? Down south, that Category 1 storm surge slosh crosses 19 and goes to the other side of the road. The flea market doesn't have a prayer. I'm telling you that right now. Where the flea market is, they're underwater. And that's from this Category 1 storm surge.
One thing that I want to point out that Carl, we've been talking a lot about the maps and things. I actually have a copy at my office. I brought it with me of the preliminary report. So if you guys want that, give me your business card and I'll be more than happy to email that 189 pages for your reading pleasure to tell you about, because, and this is very important for you guys, and I mean that because we have to be federally backed. You know, we have to have federal subsidies for our people, for your people. And how do we stay in compliance with that? Adopting this. Okay?
Is that available now online?
I found it online.
What is the address?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
And I mean that if it was on the FEMA web, because I go on there and I look for
You can
so.
go to Citrus County flood maps and you can locate it there.
And-
Barb and I were on that.
Yeah, I mean, but
We have a
I,
link on our website.
yeah, and I don't remember, but I have it in a PDF, but, because I look for so much information and data to kind of, know what I'm talking about for you guys. I happened upon this, so if you guys want it, you guys can look at it while you're here. Carl might be able to.
So are you saying because we adopted that there will still be FEMA funding?
Well, no.
Or that it's phasing out?
Well, see,
right?
here's the thing, there's two different things that we're talking about. We're talking about the map, and then you're talking about the Big Waters Act. They're two separate items. The mapping is what they're talking about to get our county, more acclimated to where the floodplains are actually at. So this has nothing to do with the rates, okay, that we're talking about, that you guys wanna know about, how that. This has to do with where's the house in the flood, is it in a floodplain, hey, I'm on this road. In order to stay federally subsidized, the county has to adopt this, okay? And if they don't, then the premiums will increase even further than what the Big Waters Act would be.
What is going on with the Big Waters Act?
And we'll go ahead and we'll talk about that, that's a great segue.
I'm gonna introduce this carefully. Because
Yes.
I really want you guys to get an understanding of what's going on here. When FEMA is creating maps, they establish locations of special flood hazard areas and the regulations that go along with it, okay? That's what the maps do. What you're discussing, which is bigger waters, it's, there was a legislator by the name of Maxine Waters, who came up with this idea. And I think it was a direct result of Sandy, Hurricane
It was.
Sandy, that went through the Northeast and did so much damage. Everybody who buys flood insurance, they pay a premium. And a certain piece of that premium goes into a fund, which is basically called a recovery fund. When there is a huge catastrophic event, money is in that recovery fund that FEMA can grab that money and send it to respond to an emergency.
That was never in place before.
The problem is that that fund, whatever little bit of money was in that fund, when Hurricane Sandy went through, it not only wiped out the fund, but it left them with a $1 billion deficit. We're talking huge. I really don't know what the number is, but I'm telling you, it's a huge amount of money that they went into debt.
It's like 13 billion,
So-
I think it was in my insurance.
I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, is that the flood insurance premiums pay for flood damage. FEMA to intervene and help people out in the event of floods. Now, the second thing that's going on that most people don't understand or realize is that when you were buying flood insurance in a flood zone A, or in a V, I think it even applied to V zones, but when you were in a flood zone and you were paying premiums, the government at some point recognized that flood insurance is expensive and it would be very hard for the average person to afford flood insurance, so their premiums were subsidized.
And I'm gonna pause. Those particular homes are the older homes, that, are more, they get the heftiest subsidies, those older homes. Those homes that never needed an elevation certificate before, that was out like near the Chris River, burial grounds, or out, and it was a 1982 home or a 1979 home. They were getting the most subsidies. That is why they were not required to have an elevation certificate. Now that has changed.
Yeah, there were many, many buildings that were built prior to the regulations or in communities that didn't have flood regulations, and they ended up building these structures below the base flood elevation. Well, if that person truly went to their agent and wanted to get flood insurance, and the premium was presented to them at the actual cost that premium cost, they would never be able to afford it.
That's what you're seeing now.
So the federal government subsidized all these premiums. So I'm gonna use some hypothetical numbers. A person would go down and they'd have a house and it might be 12 inches below the BFE, and they are getting $150,000 worth of coverage, their premium would be $1,000. What they never realized was that that the premium wasn't really $1,000.
It was
It was
13.
being subsidized another $10,000 by the government. Now, Maxine Waters and her cohort, whose name is something bigger,
Yeah, we don't like them.
they got together and they created legislation that said, and their argument was, I don't really understand why the government is subsidizing these people who insist on living in a flood zone at risk of flooding and expect us to bail them out with federal money. That was the argument. Why do they do that? So Biggert-Waters Act says that for these homes that don't comply with the regulations, or they're called pre-firm, remember I mentioned that word, flood insurance rate map?
1984 and older.
Yeah. Pre-firm structures that don't comply, they're being subsidized. What the government wanted to do was phase out that subsidy
That's
and
what you're
say,
seeing.
we're no longer gonna subsidize these homes. Now, the way it affected these homes was, if you were the owner of that home and you had insurance and you were paying $1,000 and the premium should have been $10,000, what they said was they were going to increase your premium by 25% per year until your premium reached the unsubsidized rate. So there are people out there with existing homes that when Biggert-Waters took effect, they saw their premium automatically kick up 25%. And
And
then,
more.
had it gone on, the next year, it would have kicked up another 25%, and the year after that, another 25, and another 25, and another 25, and so on.
And I'm gonna pause, Carl, because in certain zones and severity of loss in seasonal secondary homes, those premiums are higher.
Yeah.
It could even go higher.
It goes higher. I mean, the federal, they started the Federal Reserve Fund this year. So a portion of your premium for the flood policies are getting put in there. And they've also increased in it, and some of them are little monetary things, but every dollar does count. You know, where, like for instance, your federal policy fees that everybody has to pay, those gone up, you know, like $20, you know, $10. Every, you know, but each one of those dollars certainly adds up. But it's not just the 25%. It's 25% plus what zone you're in, plus the occupancy, plus severe repetitive loss. So the 25% could actually be 45, 30, or more.
Again, down in Pinellas County where Tampa Tribune has been spending a tremendous amount of time reporting this incident.
Right, Pinellas is really, if you wanna know for your realtors, you guys really need to read their industry news.
Right.
They
Now,
are your catalyst to help.
The point I'm trying to make here though is the scare tactic that we're all sitting here trying to get an answer for is that elderly people that this 25 and 25 starts banging in may walk away from houses in Shore Acres that are not where you got a beautiful boat in your backyard either. They are 5 by 5, 6, 8, 10 blocks. Okay, they may be walking away, creating another depression that we saw
That's right.
when they bundled all the damn mortgages. In the same way, if they don't
Well, and-
stop this and take the 4 years that they're trying to, today's paper said they wanna go back and rescind this BS, 4 more years of investigation to get accurate figures. And you're talking about Sandy, they're going back to Katrina.
I know
Yeah.
that.
We're talking 5 to 8 billion that Katrina lost,
Yeah.
that nobody's talking
Well,
about.
I just wanna pause,
So,
90%
yeah,
of
this
all the
is
major
this-
disasters that you see in the world, okay, are water related.
Oh, of course.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
so,
I mean, look
You
at
know,
Typhoon.
everything that you see on the news is water related, and who pays for that? You and I. You know, when we had our storms down here, people in Oklahoma were paying for us. When they have the storm up in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, we were paying for them. When they have the storms in Indonesia, guess what? We pay for them too. Do you wanna know why? Because we have reinsurance. Reinsurance to make sure that those particular policies get paid if in the event of a claim happens, and they insure all over the world. So our dollar pays for everybody.
Right, and my point is the real estate seminar here is that they are losing literally millions and millions of dollars a week in deals that are not.
I'm
being
losing that
closed.
too.
So, you know, I think what everybody in this room is sitting here for is to find out, in effect, are we gonna, you know, negate this Bigots Waters Act, put it into a recession, and let it get better and, you know, more accurate details of this.
Well,
They're just throwing 25% out like
Well,
it's.
I'm just
neat.
gonna say in defense for Carl, I'm going to say that he and I do not have any legal right to say if they're going to continue or not to continue.
Oh, okay.
We
Well,
can
yeah.
tell you what is current and what is going on up until this very day.
Well, the point-
Because we, like you, are waiting to hear what they're doing as well.
But you don't know what to tell a prospective buyer. That's
No,
the
I don't.
damnest thing about it.
I have to
I don't know what to tell them when I bring them to you.
And I don't know what to tell them when I'm talking to them about
All right, so
insurance.
herein lies the problem. We've got buyers from all over the United
That's
States
correct.
that wanna retire in this community.
That's correct.
And we cannot perform what we're supposed to do for them because exactly what we're sitting here for.
And
The deal is gonna be busted, not by the price in some cases.
no, I agree.
And not by the location in some cases.
And that's where your
It's gonna be
National
by the
Association of
insurance.
Realtors and your Florida chapter really is your advocate. Yes, Bonnie?
I just want to say, for all the realtors here, NAR sent out a call for action yesterday.
That's right.
In our county, I was dismayed that only 4.69% of the realtors answered that call to action. That call to action goes to our government people up in Washington. And it's, you know, and NAR has always said, the more voices heard, the better. But NAR and Florida Realtors are fighting this every day, and they're in Washington right now
Yeah.
trying to get something done.
Trying to
Not
get it
only do
repealed.
they want that repealed,
Right.
but they want another solution, and it's ongoing, and I'll tell you, we probably won't know anything till about January, because it's changing.
Well,
day
I've
to
heard,
day.
I've heard a couple of dates thrown out at me. I just heard at the beginning of the week, right, you know, and I even posted it on my page, my insurance resource, and I think I posted on the realtor page around Thanksgiving, they may hope. Then I've also heard January 15th. So, I'm really hoping that, that there will be change for us, because you're losing business and I'm losing business. And it's not, I don't like the fact that you're losing business, because I look at it, I've lived here since I was 11. And I know families that have lived on the coastline, and generation after generation after generation have lived there. And it just so happens that this generation had to refinance that particular property. And they're in a position where they're gonna lose that family homestead. So it's not just the new buyers. I have a heart for the total community and what everybody is going through, because we're all a part of this together. And it's right, you know, we all have to take part. You know, I myself, I'm licensed with the state regarding insurance. I rely on you guys to fight for me, just like I fight for you guys. So it is very important that you guys do your call to action.
The other thing, you know, I mean, that everybody here is pretty aware of is that if I own this property outright and you tell me the best I can do.
You don't have to.
Is $12,000 a year, and I said, well, I'm paying $1,200, and you go, yeah, but you just bought this property, so I have to raise you to $12,000. So then I say, well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna put $12,000 in the bank.
They
and
have a
I'm gonna pray
choice.
for 5 or 6 years that I don't flood.
That's correct.
And if I do, then I've got the case.
You have a choice.
Right.
If you're a homeowner
But
and you
Mr.
live
and
in that,
Mrs. Right, Mr. and Mrs.
Yeah.
Financee
yeah, they don't
are
have.
not in that same ballpark.
They
There's
don't
very
have
few
the
people
choice.
that have their homes paid for.
That's very true in that
So,
area.
you know, it's a really big problem.
It is. But Pinellas County and your realtors are really your biggest advocates in fighting at the state level right now. Because they're being, I mean, we're hit hard, they're hit the worst, let me tell you. I don't know, I mean, really, it you know, but you want it, just go on and look at those, but, there's only limited information, and just like you get information daily, we get information daily. And we pass it on, and give to you to the best of our ability. And until we know something with a definitive, we can just give you the answers that we know. And provide you the best answers possible. I mean, the flood insurance premiums have gone up quite significantly. I've bound one policy since October 1st for flood, and it was in Inverness. and thankfully with the elevation certificate, it was only $400. But still, just the same, I'm losing business just like you guys are losing business. And I don't know how to talk to my clients. I mean, just imagine how it is for me to talk to them when they're talking to the current homeowner and saying, well, I only pay $400 on my flood insurance, and then I call them back and I'm giving them a quote for $8,000. You know, so I get a lot of questions. Here's another point. Tanya actually called me and asked me about, and I think it was you, so forgive me if I'm wrong, about can you assume a policy? Can you assume a policy with flood? No, you can't.
That's the big, that's it.
You know, so I mean, everybody's trying to do something. You know, I mean, we're all trying to figure out how to play the game, and you know, those, you know, we can't. Those are not. You just can't assume those. But the next thing is that if this doesn't change this year, next year it's just going to be even worse and much harder on us, and we have to think out of the box. Private insurance companies are starting to look at ways to do flood insurance. So if the federal program is, let's hypothetically say 10,000, private flood insurance may be 4,000 to 6,000. And that's something that I can tell you in my industry news that they're looking at very quickly, okay? So, I don't necessarily know what the end result will be at the Biggest Waters Act. I'm hoping that they'll postpone it. I'm hoping that these two people will fall off the face of the earth on camera.
I wanna read something to you. I don't know if you'll find this humorous or not, but I got an article from the Insurance Journal. The date of the article is, where's that?
Actually, that's the article that I put on the website.
It says October 28th, but the number I said that the the NFIP program was in debt $1 billion. I was wrong. It's 25 billion.
Yeah, I thought it was like.
It's huge. $25 billion in debt.
I knew it was like.
There's a bipartisan action that's taking place right now. And it says that they are building very strong support to postpone the Bigger Waters legislation. Here's a quote from Maxine Waters herself. Over the past several months, I have felt the harm and heartache that many Americans have already experienced as a result of changes to the NFIP. From the start, I have made it clear that I would lead the effort to fix the unintended consequences of the Bigger Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act. And she said that statement released by her office announcing the bipartisan deal. Maxine Waters herself is leading the crusade to rescind her legislation.
That sounds like.
Is that a politician or what?
She gonna put, yeah.
Okay, I have been in meetings with FEMA, and FEMA feels very confident that a bipartisan agreement will be reached, okay? It's in the works, and everybody feels confident that it's gonna happen. Nobody wants areas like ours to go into an economic decline because of people abandoning their homes, and quite frankly, it will happen.
It will.
Well, you know,
Well,
point,
people can't afford that, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not conceivable,
Yeah,
you know?
if
And
you
it's
can't
just-
sell,
It's just like the smartest thing you can do right now is in your due diligence, if you've got 15-day right of inspect, whatever you have them do their due diligence at finding their insurance. Can they afford it? Are they gonna be able to do it? If not, they better sign cancellation.
now, one thing, and I'm not even sure, I'm not sure if I should mention this, but I'm going to anyway. The federal government has what's called a flood mitigation program. Okay, now the word mitigation obviously means that you want to do away with flood hazards, okay? Mitigate the flood problems. The federal government gives money to the state of Florida, particularly the Department of Emergency Management. They get a huge chunk of money. And then that money is dispersed by the Department of Emergency Management to counties, and the counties are supposed to use the money to mitigate flood hazards, okay? One of the components of the program is that there's money out there to purchase properties. If a person has a home that's below the VFE and the insurance premiums go up to $12,000 and the home maybe doesn't have a great value to it, or let's just say it would cost more money to raise or elevate the home to take it out of the flood hazard than it would be just to demolish the home, the federal government considers that a worthwhile expense to purchase the home from the people, and they will provide the federal money to buy it. And I want to say, the dollar amount, if my memory serves me right, it's up to, one program is up to $175,000. Is that?
Oh, you're looking at me like I don't know anything about this program, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, I don't know about this one.
you got Shore Acres with 23,000 people and it's all in a flood zone.
Yeah, I know.
So if
I
they
know.
wanna buy every house in the neighborhood and eliminate a community of Shore
Well,
Acres.
Well, that's basically what we're saying, I mean,
That's not.
I virtually saw, like, online, you know, where they hypothetically had said if all the people had left in the flood zone, you know, and people left the area due to what was left, and it was like this little itty bitty piece left in, like, the northern center of Florida,
Well,
and that was
tax
just
base.
basically it, and, so I'm not really quite sure, I mean, and that's the honest answer.
Well, it's like it's Crystal River, if you take Kings Drive out of the equation, everybody left. As opposed to, let's say, a country street off of 488, the same number of people. How much tax revenue you think would be lost in those two different divisions? Probably 25 million downtown, and maybe 200,000 out west.
yeah, that's
Well,
an
then
issue.
your community is gone.
That's an issue that has to be addressed.
Yeah, if they walk away from it and say, I
But just
can't.
understand that, you know, what we discussed today was two separate topics. We discussed mapping, and then we discussed the Big Waters Act, because I don't want the two to be because they're two separate. I mean, they coincide eventually, but right now they're separate, okay? Yes, sir.
My concern is, when I send somebody to an insurance person to find out about flood insurance, are they gonna check the new rate maps as well as the old ones to find out whether?
I
it's
only
gonna be
have
flooded a year
access
from now?
to the,
Yes.
you know,
That's a big issue, I think.
I have access right now to the current rates, so you're getting the biggest
That
water,
was my next
you're
question.
getting those rates.
But what I don't know is what the flood zone's gonna be when new rate maps go into place, that's my concern.
Yeah, I'm fielding probably 15 or 20 requests a day
Yeah.
for people who wanna know how the new maps are going to affect
They
their
can
flood
come over to
zone.
the building division and probably get answers, that.
That's correct, because
Yeah,
my,
that's
I
what we
have
do.
they have the newest model, I'm still, in my zone, in my elevation that they provide to me is based on the old
Yeah,
information,
that's my
so,
concern right there.
but the rates are current.
Our current, okay.
Current
Are
according to
current.
the old map.
You know, 1984 and older that never needed an elevation certificate now does. If you do not have it, Tanya can tell you, the rates are extremely high. They're called tentative or provisional rates. They are meant to be higher to discourage the individual, because I wouldn't wanna pay that. I would rather pay the however much fee to get the elevation certificate and then get the actual premium. But some people don't, they wanna just say, okay, whatever, they have a year to comply. You know, some people are not quick on the spot.
So like the people that have current flood insurance, like our sellers that we have listed for sale, and they're, like my home, I live on the Homosassa, my home's 1981,
I know.
I have flood.
I know, with me.
So the people that, like us that pay, and my neighbors that have their house for sale, and they're like, well, what's gonna happen to my rate?
You're gonna need a new elevation certificate if you
I
say.
have one.
Or well, then, if you have an elevation.
6.39.
If you have an elevation
What's your
certificate already
BFA?
on your property, then you already have the rate.
Okay,
The new people would have the higher premium because you're grandfathered in on the older rates.
right.
You're still gonna get high, your premiums are still gonna be higher. So if you were 500, you might be 700 or, you know, but,
25%.
right.
So each year they're gonna go up 25% until you meet the current, that's the
So
way
you
it
meet
reads.
the
Yeah.
unsubsidized.
Plus, if you were a seasonal secondary home, you know, then you have an additional increase.
Right.
And if it was severe repetitive loss, then you have an additional increase. And if you were in a V zone, there's an additional increase. So it's not just the 25%.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yay.
A whole lot of houses back.
That's correct. I mean, and obviously, I mean, we have, it's something that really you need to, really disclose, with the possibility, I mean, on your disclosure, put the biggest water sack, on there and let them do their research. You can only give them what you know. They have to make and determine they have to take some burden to bear themselves and make that determination if it is worthy enough for them to wanna have that beautiful house on the water.
Well, and is it good to say that maybe our sellers that are currently listed, that might be paying like $1,000 a year for flood, to go ahead and say, if someone were to purchase my home, what would be their estimated new rate? Could we do that?
Yes, if I
As
have an
long as we
elevation
have an
certificate.
elevation.
Right,
That's correct.
sure, because I've
Elevations.
done that with a couple, and
Yeah.
then you can advertise, especially if it's a still,
Yeah.
and your new rate will be such.
X, Y, Z.
The
That's right.
insurance company will not give you an estimated premium without an elevation certificate.
Right,
They
right,
won't do
no.
Yeah.
Melissa goes, you got an elevation?
I know, that's,
Well,
and if not,
actually-
I'll call Carl.
Actually, they can give you a rate
I
without
can.
an elevation certificate.
It's called the tentative or provisional rate, and it's so high that you don't even wanna like, I'm scared to give
What
it to you
is,
guys.
It's the worst case scenario.
It is the worst case scenario.
And that's not the rate really that's gonna do you.
No,
any
they wanna
favors.
discourage you. They want you to do it right the first time.
Are we able to get a hold, is the building department retaining elevation certificates?
Yes, that's where I get all of them.
We retain all of them that
All right,
have ever
so
been submitted to
Prior
us.
person that say built the house, had to have it because they were financing, whatever.
Yep.
There is a record of that.
Yeah,
on file.
in fact, I got an elevation certificate for a home that was built in 1988.
Is it a specific site or phone number who to contact?
352-527.
The building
Oh.
department?
And you're gonna ask for Carla.
Carla,
She's a she's a very nice girl.
So you can just give her the address and see.
527-5310.
Here's the thing, I'll, for Carla, okay, because, I mean, she's a sweet, she's obviously being inundated, by a lot of requests. Some of them, like the one that she had to provide to me today, was on the microfiche. She had to actually physically go into like another room or whatever, cause it's like old school. So sometimes those take a little bit longer, to get, and sometimes, way back when, they weren't very accurate in keeping the documents.
Is there a form to order
Well,
by email?
Way back when.
yeah, BC, before Carl.
That's right.
Is there a form in the building department?
No, there is not a form.
No.
No.
You can just call up and ask for it.
I even
We don't
email
wanna be
her.
that formal.
I even email her.
Email her?
I've even emailed her. I do, it's at my, not on my person, but at my office, yes, I do. She's a really nice girl.
It's Carla, K-A-R-L-A.
It's like Larsa, it's like G.
Yeah.
I'll get there.
Yeah.
Carla, K-A-R-L-A dot G-R-Z-E-C-A. That's pronounced Greca.
Thank
but
you.
it's G-R-Z-E-C-A at BOCC dot citrus dot FL dot US.
That's a much better way.
Can a person walk in there and get that as well? Like I could walk in there and say, hey.
You can walk in and request it. I don't know that you'll walk out with one because sometimes they're hard to find. Yeah, but you can.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, you called me up, sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, if I have the elevation in my portfolio plan, can I bring it to you and get a price?
Yes.
That the new buyer will get?
Yes, I do it all the time. I do it all the time. I do it for homes, I do it for mobile homes, autos, I pretend, all the
What if it's
time.
less than the current buyer, the current owner, can I suggest? that-
I guarantee you it will not be.
It's not gonna
I
happen. It's a pipe dream.
guarantee it. I guarantee
Yeah, I
it.
just wanted to see what you would say.
What will the cost be for asking for the elevation certificate?
Say that again.
What will the cost be? What will the
Nothing.
cost-
Nothing.
Okay,
A nice thank you.
thank you.
Did you say this map due in 2014 September is online now?
Yes.
Where else can we find that? Citrus County flood maps.
I don't remember what
If you wanna do a Google search, type in FEMA preliminary maps. If you search with FEMA preliminary maps, it'll bring you up to a web page that has a map of the United States on it, and underneath it will be a drop-down box where you select your state, and it'll be Florida. You select the county, Citrus, and then, this is the really crazy part, I want y'all to get a good picture of this. When you select Florida and Citrus, it's gonna take you to a web page that has about 150 PDF files on a chart. If you try to go through all those PDF files, you will drive yourself crazy.
I did.
But what you have to,
I did.
what you have to do is you have to go all the way to the bottom of that table of PDFs, and at the bottom of it is one particular PDF, which is called the map index. Please go to the bottom of that table of PDFs and open up the map index first, and what you will see is it will give you a map of the entire county, and then it's divided up into little squares. Get a rough estimate of where your property is located and figure out which square it's in, and then it'll come with a number, and it might be something like 150D or 162D. That is the panel that your property is located on. Then you go into that big long list of PDFs and pick the appropriate panel.
But then how do you
Still hard to
tell?
do. It's
Because
still
I've
hard to
done
do.
that, and it's still hard to tell exactly. I mean, I tried to match it up with a map,
Yeah.
and that,
It
try to
is
figure out where I was
difficult
at.
to do, but your only hope of navigating all those PDF files is the hope that you can get an estimate of which panel you're supposed to be on. If you try to search through all those panels, you'll never, ever find your property.
And like I said, if you guys want, I mean, give me your business card, I'll email this to you. You don't have to go searching. I'll just quickly send out, a group email with it attached.
How current does
But you can get that right online, because I did, it was public info.
have to be to get National Street or close to National?
It doesn't, there is no currency to it. The presumption is, the elevation certificate was provided by a surveyor who was, licensed to do that. The information should stay the same.
That's correct.
Unless,
Pictures have to
I
be
mean,
updated.
I suppose that homes could settle, or there could be some changes to it that would be minor.
Yeah, pictures have to be
We
updated.
presume that they're accurate.
As long as they have them.
As long as it's sealed, signed and sealed by a registered surveyor.
Some guy sold a weekend house too. He called me and he said, who do you use as survey? I said, you already got a survey and you have the current owner's elevation. He said, no, my insurance company said I need a new elevation survey. I said, your elevation didn't change.
No, you wouldn't need it to see new pictures.
Yeah, I think he was getting.
I suspect, well, I'm not gonna address whether he's duped or not, but there are some people who think that because they have a survey by a surveyor, and the survey might list the elevation on it, that's not the same as a FEMA elevation certificate. There are many surveys out there where you'll look at the survey and it'll tell you the finished floor of this home is at 92.7 feet above sea level. That is not an elevation certificate. The FEMA form is a critter all on its own, and it is not an elevation, it is an elevation certificate.
And there's
Two
more
different
than
things.
just a base flood that's needed in order to derive a rating for insurance.
The base flood.
I need the hags and the legs. The highest elevation and the lowest elevation, that's what I call them, the hags and the legs, I need that.
The base flood elevation is always listed on the certificate also. It'll tell you what the elevation is for the base flood, and then it tells you the actual elevation of the construction and the adjacent ground. So it'll have all the information on it.
Melissa,
Yes, sir.
are you gonna be able to package, now we've been talking flood here all day. How about hurricane, wind damage, and this other stuff you still gotta deal with?
I know.
Now we gotta stick that in there too, right? Sinkholes?
Well, in insurance, they're called catastrophic ground collapse, like the guy in Bartow, and I'll just quickly, we'll just quickly shift very quickly right there. The guy on the news, you saw at Bartow where they went out the house, you saw it on the news, you woke up, there was a big hole there. It met 4 criteria, it was visible to the naked eye. It was a sudden impact. It impacted the load-bearing walls and the governmental agency condemned the structure. Under insurance, it is called a catastrophic ground collapse. The policy was paid with their all-peril deductible. Okay.
What about the one where the guy was actually sucked into a hole?
That was a catastrophic ground collapse. No, there was another one. That's a catastrophic ground collapse, okay? If it meets the 4 criteria, visible to the naked eye, a sudden impact, the load-bearing walls are not able to support the structure, and the governmental agency goes out and condemns the building, it is paid under the catastrophic ground collapse
On your homeowners.
underneath your homeowners.
So it doesn't fall under sinkhole?
No,
Okay.
yes, sir.
And back to the flood stuff.
Thank you.
If you look on the property appraiser's website right now, you have the flood zones that are on there in the GIS view. I assume those are still the old zones, correct?
I would imagine
Correct,
so.
they are.
Can I also assume that when the new ones go into place, that information will be on that GIS view?
I would imagine that the property appraiser
It's
would
very
adopt
easy to
that.
use to get a rough idea.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Once it's adopted, we'd acquire the latest
Yeah.
information and present it to you.
and I just
We
want,
defer to the building department up until that time.
as an insurance agent, looking at properties, and you guys too, I can tell you that Citrus County Property Appraiser's website is a very useful tool in comparative to other property appraisers throughout the state. So, I mean, they really do, or their technology that they have in their interactive mapping and the oblique views and things are really a tool that really are for your benefit and my benefit.
Although, we were just here a month or 2 or 3 ago, I don't know, but there was some group here from the county property appraiser's website, and they, when you go to the map overlay,
Mhm.
they said do not trust that information on their site. So,
I didn't look at them, I never looked at the map overlay, I look at the
Yeah.
oblique view like I'm God looking down at
looking
that
down
house.
at it, but yeah, if you click it on the left and say flood map, and it's, oh, you're in a
yes, yeah, I
flood
never
zone,
have
do not
there.
trust that.
Okay,
She
yeah, I
said,
never
"Don't
have,
trust
so,
that."
okay, good, that's good to know.
The reason why that statement is made is because we're not the authority that's calling his department. We put
Right.
it out there as a courtesy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is good general information,
But it's not.
but if somebody were to come to my department and tell me, well, Mr. Jones, the property appraiser says I'm not in a flood zone, and I've got this to prove it, I can't go by that.
That's correct.
The building department is the
And I
final
can't.
authority, and me as the certified floodplain manager is the final authority on flood zone or not. Their information is very useful and it's very good, but please don't put 100% stock in it. As you say, that's,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
And
We have wetland information out there as well.
And we will work
That's
with
from
you,
the
so
national
please come see
water
us at the building department.
And if you're not sure of the flood zone, it's very, very, very quick for me to just do a zone. Not do a rate, but do a zone. Then, once I get the zone, then you can give me a couple, you know,
Yes,
little
can do it by
time, I do the
address,
rate.
right?
But the zone is really quick, it's just me inputting the address and it'll just shoot, you know, and if it's like that one that I was explaining, you know, where the house itself was in standard zone and the backyard was in, that took research on their end, so it might take a little bit of time. Those don't really happen very often, but they still do, you know, but yeah, you give me a call, and then I'll let you know what it is. I do it all the time. I don't mind, and Tommy can attest, I'm pretty quick about it, you know, as much as I can. You know, I try to help, and, because I want you to sell the homes that you guys are marketing. And, well, not only to send them to me, but, it makes our community grow, and that's important to me. I mean, I look at the bigger picture, not just myself.
Carl, can you speak a moment about the fact that properties are moving in and out of the zones based on the new maps?
Yeah.
And some stuff in the paper.
One of the advantages of the new LiDAR system and creating the topographical model of the county is that Swift Mud and FEMA have actually figured out that some properties are not as high risk as they thought they were according to the old maps. Now, sometimes that's referred to as being mapped out of a flood zone.
And that's good, because now they didn't have to.
We prefer to just say that we have more accurate information now where the property is now assessed at a lower risk. Because now my numbers could be way off, so forgive me for this, but there was a ratio, and it was something like, I want to say it was like 900 properties had been mapped out of a flood zone. They've determined that they aren't at high risk. And there was something in the neighborhood of 2,200 that are higher risk than they thought before were mapped into a flood zone. So roughly 1/3 out, 2/3 in. So there are changes in that map. A little bit of discouraging news is that when the county was mapped, not the entire county was mapped, and not all flood data was incorporated into the production of the new maps. There is still a study going on over the Withlacoochee River Basin and the southeastern portion of the county. There is the possibility that in 2 years, when that data is compiled, it may yet again change the maps. Okay?
I did not think that.
I'm telling you that the old maps are terrible. The new maps that we have now are fantastic. However, they are not completely definitive. There is more data out there that's being compiled, and 2 years after September of 2014, please don't be surprised if they come out with an update or a yet again revised map. It's going to happen. I want to give you the heads up, it's going to happen. Okay? And it's because there's still some data out there floating around that hasn't been incorporated into the maps.
Well, listen, Carl, I know today wasn't about the national flood insurance, it was about what's going on in the county and the flood maps, but this information I handed them, Florida Realtors has a toolkit available that they can go to that link, and this is about the Bigger Waters Act from National Association of Realtors, it's on realtors.org. And also, by Monday, if I don't get it done tomorrow, I will send out to all of our members how you can sign up for call to action, because if you weren't, Florida Realtors sent something out, but if you weren't signed up for the program, then you wouldn't have got an email to respond. And now is, you know, so now is a good time that I'll send it out again, and hopefully we can get everybody on board, and I just wanted you to let you know what I was passing out.
Yeah, I want to copy that before we leave.
Okay, will you give this to Carl?
And I'll get you another
Okay,
copy
thanks,
of this.
Mom.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a house in the B zone, and I always thought it stood for wind velocity zone, not surge action.
B zone in relationship to a flood map is always associated with water. Yeah, water. That is, a V zone is a flood zone designation. The wind zone designations are, they're delineated in chapter 1609 of the Florida Building Code. It's a building code, it's a whole different map. And those are based on miles per hour.
Did any other county do this new mapping where you have
Yeah.
to bounce back off? I'm naturally southern.
The whole entire state did, this just happens to be our county report that I was just, interested in, but yes, all along.
Oh, I went to see our property appraiser in Lee County about 4 weeks ago and asked him about bigger orders, and he said he'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
Slide.
That's awesome. Just want to share with you, that's not really good, that's horrible.
That's not the case.
That's not the case, thankfully in Citrus County. Holy smokes. I want to let you know that, as we're going to be wrapping up here in just a couple of minutes, I only have one of these, but when I was at the state insurance conference just recently, I picked this up, How to Speak Flood. You guys can take a look at it if you want. Floodsmart.gov, okay, is a website that you guys can learn a little bit more about flood insurance. That's how, you can look at information. It gives you an overview. You can also, and I'm gonna give you this site, it's on the card. I do not know if you need a username and password for this. So if this does, please forgive me. Agents.floodsmart.gov gives resources that reinforces the, messages, flood risk scenarios. It gives you an interactive tool. So I don't know if you need a username and password, but it happens to be on this, and I wanted to share that with you. Please feel free. We're gonna wrap things up. Does anybody have any additional questions? I think we've pretty much run the gamut. Does anybody have any additional questions for Carl or myself?
Before we leave, I do have one more thing I'm gonna throw out there.
Wonderful.
And quite frankly, I'm gonna brag about the county.
Awesome.
When the National Flood Insurance Program was instituted, the federal government said communities can voluntarily participate in the program. That's where all these regulations come from, is the NFIP program. Citrus County has chosen to participate in that program, and we have what's called a community rating system. Has anybody ever heard of community rating system, or CRS? What it means is that the federal government sends a corporation down to audit my department. They look at all of our floodplain regulations, our inspectors, our method of inspections, our checklist, our procedures, our filing, and they do a complete audit of my department, and they come up with a rating. Now, right now, Citrus County is rated at a 6, and it's a scale of 10, 10 being the worst score and 1 being the best score, and we are rated as a 6 community on the CRS scale. Because we're rated at a 6, every Citrus County resident who buys flood insurance is entitled to an automatic 20% discount. Because Citrus County is enforcing those floodplain regulations, and we're doing what we can to mitigate floods.
That's good to know.
We have an effort right now with Carla Greca and myself and my assistant building official, Jim Baird. We're actually striving to get a rating of 5. If we can incorporate a few things into our program and we achieve that rating of 5, the premium discount goes up to 25%. So we're working very hard at that. And I want to clarify this, not all of Citrus County is participating in that CRS program. Okay, the city of Inverness does not participate, and the city of Crystal River does not participate. So don't expect to be able to use that 20 or 25% discount, expect that in those jurisdictions, okay?
You're talking about the city limit.
Right.
Within the city
Yeah.
limits of the cities, but everything that is unincorporated Citrus County
in
is getting currently a 20% discount on their flood insurance, and it's because we strive really, we've worked really hard at getting the best CRS rating we can as a community. And we do that by way of outreach, information to citizens.
So just imagine how Levy County must be and how much higher their rates are.
Yeah, so I'm
Because
very
then we're at
proud
a
of
six. So
Citrus
that's
County and what
awesome.
they're doing
That's awesome.
for the citizens.
Can I just say one other thing?
Yes.
About the E&O?
Yes, go right
You
ahead.
know, the DNA of real estate professionals is that they want to help people. And they want to try and be all things to all people. And that's what gets them in trouble.
Yeah.
It gets them in a lot of trouble.
That's very true.
And this flood insurance thing could get you in a lot of trouble. I think this document is a great document. I've seen it. It's a disclosure. And anything you discuss with a buyer or even a seller,
Have that signed.
you should have this signed. That you have discussed this with them so that they understand it, and you should file it with your, I'm sure you all have files on your individual transactions and things like that, being facetious. But, you should file it with them, because if you don't, it's gonna come back to bite you. And, you know, I counted the number of people in the room. 6 of you are gonna be involved in some sort of litigation during your career. That's something you never wanna be happening to. You never wanna be involved in any type of litigation when it comes to your profession, because it does you in.
And people that don't buy flood insurance get a flood rejection form from me.
Yeah.
And that's stuff for my E&O too.
So don't operate outside of your profession.
That's right.
You're not mortgage brokers, you're not real estate appraisers, you're not home inspectors, you're not insurance people. True. And that's why it's so important to refer to these professionals. I'm just.
Well, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come today, and certainly, if anybody would like to stay and talk one-on-one, Carl and I will stick around for a couple more minutes. Feel free to give us a call at our offices. We'll be more than happy to help you out with any additional questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Not a problem. I will do that. I'm not going back to the office today, but first thing in the morning, we have that. Pardon? Yes, sir. Okay, good. I will email that to you in the morning. Oh, Mark, thank you. Okay, Michelle, I'll get that to you. Thank you. Martha, did you want to report too? Yeah, yeah. I don't, see, no, I told people they can find it and then they send it to me. That's right, so if you can't file it. Yes, I will. Okay, sounds good. Anytime you need any help. Okay, cool. Yeah, good. My coworker, if it's commercial, my coworker Kristen Martin will be the person that will assist you there, but she's awesome. Yeah, okay, good. We're really gonna have it on stones, I mean, because you still have the 25% rate increase. Yes. Yeah, because they will, if they automatically get the 25%, and then depending on what zone they get additional increase. Yeah, that's right, yeah. This is industry specific, you know, talking about, you know, premiums and stuff like that. Yeah, no, it's for everybody, yeah, it is. Thanks so much. Okay, well, I'll send that to you. I gave, there's my business, and I gave like one of these for your iPad, your phone, or whatever.
He's basically,
That's the wireless.
yeah, he has that.
I am in Beverly Hills. I'm right next, you know where the Shell gas station is in Beverly Hills? There's a building down the hill to your left, it used to be the Blue Diamond Restaurant way back when, that's my building. It's down, building's down. Yes, I do.
Sends us a disc.
Yeah, why?
On it, or over the federal.
You're welcome, I look forward to talking with you.
Thank you for the question, I appreciate it.
Sure, I'll go ahead and I'll do that. I personally do not. I would talk to him about that myself, because he specializes in that.
yeah, okay, that's
Yeah, yeah, and I'll email you that in the morning, but I would encourage you to talk to him about the,
Yeah.
yes, you got it. You're welcome.